The day the world froze. Hold on, before you dive into this story. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like if the person you loved most doubted you in your most vulnerable moment? If this story moves you, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. And at the end, let me know your opinion in the comments. Do you think forgiveness is always possible? The day the world froze, he left her in the delivery room, convinced the baby wasn't his. 2 years later, he saw a child who was his spitting image. Ethan Reed stood petrified in the hospital room doorway, unable to take another step. The soft cries of a newborn echoed faintly from inside, but all he could hear were his parents' voices in his head, whispering doubt and certainty with equal weight. His father had told him days ago that Clara had been seeing someone else behind his back, that the baby she was now holding couldn't possibly be his. His mother had added just enough emotional pressure to sway him further, reminding him of his career, the empire he was building, and how one wrong decision could unravel it all. At first, Ethan hadn't wanted to believe it, but fear has a way of blinding even the most intelligent man. When Clara turned her head and saw him standing there, her face lit up. Tired, pale, but so full of love and hope it almost broke him, she called to him with her eyes, a silent plea for support, for presence, for belief. But he didn't move. Instead, he took a step back, and then another, until he turned and walked away, leaving her alone with their newborn son. As the elevator doors closed in front of him, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but it wasn't relief. It was numbness. That kind of numbness that creeps in when you've just made a decision you know you can never take back. Clara didn't cry when he left. She didn't scream or run after him. She just looked down at the baby in her arms, whose tiny features already showed hints of the man she had loved and now hated. Her heart didn't just break, it unraveled slowly, like a loose thread, until all that was left was exhaustion and disbelief. She whispered soft words to the infant. She promised him she would protect him, that he was wanted, even if his father refused to see it. In the days that followed, Ethan buried himself in work. He signed deals, gave press conferences, and smiled for photo shoots. The tabloids praised his focus, his clarity, his unwavering ambition. No one knew what he had left behind to maintain that image. No one asked, and he never offered an explanation. When people brought up Clara, he would dismiss her with a blank stare, pretending she had been nothing more than a fleeting mistake. Meanwhile, Clara moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of vibrant Austin, Texas. She juggled sleepless nights and endless diapers, freelance jobs and overdue bills. She became quiet, introspective, and strong in ways she never imagined she would need to be. Every time she looked into her son's eyes, blue like his father's, she felt a storm of conflicting emotions. She loved him more than life itself. But to forgive Ethan, that was something she couldn't even fathom. Her body healed. Her spirit did not. She never told Ethan about the long nights in the ER, about the first fever or the first laugh. She never sent pictures or texts. If he wanted to be gone, then let him stay gone. But deep down, somewhere underneath the anger and the fatigue, a small part of her hoped. Not that he would come back, but that he would realize what he had left. She didn't need him to fix what he had broken. She just wanted him to see the truth. And the truth, she knew. It grew stronger every day in the arms of a little boy who looked more like his father with every passing hour. What would you have done in Clara's place? Would you have reached out to Ethan or let him go completely? Comment your thoughts. 2 years later. 2 years passed, marked not by calendar pages, but by sleepless nights, scraped knees, and tiny victories. Clara's life had been restructured around her son, Leo, who had grown from a fragile newborn into a vibrant, curious toddler, with a mop of blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that mirrored the very man she had spent so much time trying to forget. Each day she woke before the sun was up, often to the sound of tiny feet pitter-pattering into her room. And each night she collapsed into bed after juggling work, parenting, and the heavy silence that settled once Leo was asleep. Money was always tight. The part-time legal assistant job she had taken after her maternity leave was barely enough to keep them afloat. She supplemented her income with freelance legal research projects she completed late at night, long after Leo was in bed. Her friends had slowly faded away, some unsure of what to say, others too wrapped up in their own lives to notice hers had completely changed. Her parents helped when they could, but they lived in another state and had their own struggles to manage. Clara didn't talk about Ethan, not with her friends, not with her family, and certainly not with Leo, who was still too young to ask where his daddy was or why he never came. But she thought about him more than she wanted to admit. Every time Leo smiled a certain way or said something with the same cadence Ethan once used, she felt a silent ache in her chest. She no longer cried. That part of her had dried up in the first few months after Ethan left. Now, she just carried the loss with her, neatly folded into her days, like the small scar on her abdomen. A reminder that something had been taken from her. There were times when the bitterness threatened to consume her, especially when she remembered how easily Ethan had walked away, without explanation, without a goodbye. He hadn't even held Leo. He had made his decision based on lies, lies told by people who were supposed to protect him. And what hurt the most was that he hadn't questioned them. Not once. He had believed her capable of betrayal. He had believed her child wasn't his, and he had walked away without a backward glance. But Clara didn't let that bitterness show. She couldn't afford to. She had a little boy to raise, and Leo needed joy, not shadows. So she learned to smile again. For him. She took him to the park every weekend, even when she was exhausted. She read him the same bedtime story 6 nights in a row because it made him laugh. She taught him to say, please and thank you, to tie his shoes, to be kind. Every milestone he hit, she celebrated like it was Christmas. Still, there were hard days. Days when Leo got sick and she had no one to lean on. Days when she wondered if she would ever trust someone again. Sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet and her defenses were down, she would find herself imagining what might have happened if Ethan had stayed. If he had held their son that day. If he had looked past the lies. But she always pushed those thoughts away. She had stopped believing in second chances. One gray afternoon, she took Leo to a park in New York City after work. He loved the swings, and she loved watching him fly, his little sneakers kicking at the sky. She sat on the bench with a thermos of warm coffee and a book she didn't intend to read. Leo's laughter filled the air. Then, across the field, she saw him. Ethan. He wasn't dressed like a businessman that day. No suit, no tie, just dark jeans and a wool coat. He looked older, a little more tired, but he was unmistakably the same man she had once loved. Their eyes met, and in that split second, she saw something flash across his face. Shock, disbelief, maybe even recognition. He stared at Leo, who had just gotten off the swing and was now running toward her with a wide smile. Ethan didn't move. He stood there, frozen, as if his world had just tilted on its axis. Clara turned away just before Leo reached her, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the wind. She picked up her son and whispered, "It's time to go, sweetie. trying to keep her voice steady. That night, as she tucked Leo into bed, she couldn't stop shaking. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if Ethan had really seen what she feared, and hoped he had seen. But for the first time in 2 years, something had cracked in the wall she had built around herself. And it terrified her, because if he had seen Leo clearly, if he knew, then everything might change. And after surviving so long on her own, Clara wasn't sure she was ready for that kind of earthquake. Do you think Clara should have run away with Leo for good? Or is it important for a child to know their father? Share your point of view in the comments. The beginning of a bridge. Ethan couldn't sleep that night, not after what he'd seen in the park. That little boy, the way he ran, the way he laughed, the exact shade of his blonde hair, the same piercing blue eyes that stared back at Ethan every morning in the mirror. It had been a split second, but in that moment, something inside him shifted violently. He had always believed he'd done the right thing, or at least the necessary thing. His parents had been so sure. The timing didn't add up, they had said. Clara had been distant. She had smiled at other men. The seed of doubt had been planted, and he had watered it with fear and self-preservation. But seeing that child, so unmistakably his own, made all those excuses crumble like dried leaves. He spent hours pacing his apartment, ignoring calls and canceling meetings. His assistant was bewildered, unsure why the usually composed and sharp CEO had suddenly gone off the grid. Ethan offered no explanation, because he didn't have one. All he had were questions. What had he done? How had he let himself believe such a lie? And most of all, what kind of man abandons his own child without even asking for the truth? By morning, the exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was soul deep. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at an untouched mug of coffee, thinking back to the day he left that hospital room. The image came back in clear focus. Clara holding their newborn, her eyes full of silent hope, and him walking away without a single word. He hadn't even looked at the baby. The shame was sudden and blinding. He didn't deserve forgiveness, but he knew, with absolute certainty, that he needed to find them. He needed to see the child again. He needed to talk to Clara, even if she slammed the door in his face. It took him 2 days to track her down. She had moved, changed jobs, cut off most of their mutual contacts. But Ethan had resources, and with every new piece of information, his guilt only deepened. She had lived alone, raised their child without help, not even child support, because she had never asked for anything. She hadn't tried to punish him. She hadn't exposed him in the media. She hadn't demanded a thing. She had simply disappeared and endured. When he found the address, he sat in his car for almost an hour, watching the building from a distance. He saw her come out with Leo, holding his small hand as they crossed the street. Leo chattered excitedly, pointing at things only he could understand, and Clara smiled down at him with a tired tenderness that pierced Ethan's heart. He didn't approach them that day. He couldn't. He wasn't ready, and they didn't deserve to be ambushed. But he started coming back. Every day for a week, he watched them from afar, not because he wanted to invade their privacy, but because he needed to see what they had become without him. Leo was full of life, curious, joyful, fearless, and Clara was no longer the soft-spoken girl he remembered. She was fierce now, focused, and radiant in a way that came not from ease, but from survival. Ethan was beginning to realize that by leaving her, he hadn't just lost his son's life. He had lost the chance to grow alongside a woman who had become something extraordinary. The next week, he finally mustered the courage to talk to her. He waited outside Leo's daycare, timing the moment carefully. When Clara walked out with Leo skipping beside her, he slowly got out of his car and approached. Her eyes locked with his instantly, and her whole body tensed. She gently pulled Leo behind her, protectively, like a reflex, and Ethan stopped several feet away, not wanting to cause any more harm than he already had. "Clara," he said, his voice dry with nerves. "Please don't go, I need to talk." She looked at him, her eyes hard, but unreadable. "There's nothing to talk about." "Yes, there is," he said quietly. "I saw him. I know, and I didn't." He trailed off. "I didn't know." She exhaled sharply, looking down at Leo, who was tugging at her coat, oblivious to the tension. "That's the problem, Ethan. You didn't want to know." He swallowed, unable to deny it. "I was wrong. I was lied to by my parents." "I don't care what they told you," she interrupted, her voice quiet but trembling. "You walked away. You didn't ask. You didn't even hold him." The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan nodded slowly. "I know. I've lived with that every day since I saw him. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I had to come. I had to tell you to your face. I'm sorry, Clara. I was weak, and I was afraid, and I believed the wrong people. But he looks so much like me. I saw it. I know he's mine." She looked away, her eyes glistening, and she knelt down beside Leo, brushing a leaf from his coat. When she stood up again, she said nothing for a long time. "Then," she finally said, "I don't know what you want from us, but if you're going to be here, truly here, you can't disappear again." "I won't," he said quickly. "Too fast," she replied. "You can't say that yet. We'll see." And with that, she took Leo's hand and walked away, leaving Ethan standing in the cool afternoon, shaken, but somehow lighter than he had felt in years. It wasn't hope yet, but it wasn't the end either. Comment right now. Do you think Clara should give Ethan a second chance, or is the damage already done? What would you have done? The slow road, the days following their first conversation were fragile, suspended between uncertainty and a quiet possibility. Ethan didn't push. He didn't call or show up unannounced. Instead, he waited, unsure if he was respecting her space or just too scared to risk rejection again. He returned to his routines, but nothing felt the same. The boardroom lost its excitement. The applause at shareholder meetings sounded hollow. The numbers on screens meant little when he couldn't stop thinking about a little boy with his smile, and a woman who had once trusted him enough to carry their child alone. Clara, meanwhile, couldn't stop replaying their encounter. She was mad, furious even, but underneath the anger was a strange tremor, not of fear, but of something she didn't want to name yet. Ethan had seemed lost, not rehearsed or manipulative, and most disorienting of all, Leo had liked him. He hadn't cried or hidden behind her. He had looked at Ethan with an open, innocent curiosity, and it haunted her. She wasn't ready to forgive him. She wasn't sure she ever would be. But she also couldn't deny the ache of seeing her son meet his father for the first time, without knowing what he had missed. The following weekend, Clara sent a brief text. It wasn't sentimental. It was careful and clear. "If you still want to see him, meet us at the park at 11 on Saturday. Just you." Ethan stared at the screen for a long time, before texting back a simple, "I'll be there." That Saturday, he arrived early. He wore jeans and a gray sweater, trying not to look like a corporate machine. He hadn't known what to bring, so he carried a small toy car Leo might like and a book under his arm, something his own mother used to read to him when he was a boy. When Clara arrived with Leo bundled up in a bright yellow jacket, the little boy ran immediately for the playground. Ethan didn't move, unsure if he should follow. Clara stayed beside him, her arms crossed, not looking directly at him. "Thank you for coming," he said carefully. She nodded, her eyes still following Leo. "I don't know what this is yet, I just thought he should have the option of knowing you. That's all. I don't want to confuse him, Ethan said. I just want to be around, even if it's just as a friend for now. He doesn't need a friend. He needs a father, someone who shows up and stays. I want to be that. I really do. Then don't say it, she replied. Show it. Leo came running up at that moment, sand on his hands and a wide grin on his face. He looked up at Ethan and pointed to the swings. Push me. It was such a simple request, but it landed like a stone in Ethan's chest. He smiled softly and nodded. Yes, buddy. Let's go. They walked to the swings together. Ethan gently helped Leo onto the seat and began pushing. Not too hard. Listening to the little boy shriek with laughter. Clara watched from the bench, her arms still crossed, unsure what to feel. Part of her wanted to cry. Part of her wanted to get up and leave. But mostly, she just sat. Because for the first time since Leo was born, she wasn't doing this alone. For the next few weeks, these visits became a pattern. Ethan came to the park every Saturday. He brought small things, snacks, toys, books, but more importantly, he brought time. He learned how to talk to Leo, to match his pace, to answer his endless questions. He never rushed. He never made promises he couldn't keep. And slowly, Clara began to let her guard down, inch by inch. One afternoon, when Leo had fallen asleep on her lap in the sun, she looked up at Ethan and asked, "Why didn't you question it? Why was it so easy to believe them?" He didn't evade it. "Because I was scared. I was selfish, and I didn't want to lose everything I thought I'd achieved. But I lost more than I ever imagined. I see that now." Clara looked down at her son's face. "He's amazing, you know. You missed so much." "I know," he said quietly. "But if there's still time to learn who he is, even just a little bit, I'll take it." She didn't reply. She just kept holding her son. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to protect him all by herself. And that, even if she wouldn't say it yet, mattered more than anything else. What does home mean to you? Is it a place, a person, or a feeling? Tell us in the comments. The scars that healed the 5th month of their new rhythm brought a fragile calm, like the first clear days after a storm. Ethan was no longer a stranger in Leo's life. He still wasn't called Dad, and he never asked for it. But when Leo fell and scraped his knee one afternoon, instinctively, he went to Ethan before anyone else. Clara felt something shift. She was sitting only feet away, present. And yet, her son had chosen the man who once left before he ever held him. That moment moved her in a way she didn't want to examine too closely, because if she did, she'd have to acknowledge that Ethan was becoming a real part of their world. And it scared her. Not because she didn't want it, but because she did. And wanting meant risking everything again. Ethan felt the shift, too. He began to anticipate Leo's needs, noticing little things. When he got overwhelmed with noise, when he needed quiet time to wake up before being spoken to, which stories made him laugh. He would ask Clara questions, not just to engage, but to understand. He didn't try to overstep boundaries. He didn't challenge her authority. If anything, he respected it so deeply, it sometimes took her by surprise. And every time she waited for him to fail or disappear, he didn't. One day, after a long afternoon at the Children's Museum, Leo fell asleep in the back seat of Ethan's car. They had all gone together. Clara had insisted on taking separate cars at first, but Ethan had offered to drive them so Leo wouldn't have to be moved from vehicle to vehicle. She had grudgingly agreed. After he parked in front of her apartment, they sat in silence for a while, neither of them wanting to wake the boy. "Do you ever think," Ethan said softly, not looking at her, "about how different everything might have been if I had stayed that night?" Clara didn't answer right away. She traced a circle in the condensation on the window. "Sometimes, but mostly I tried not to. What good would it do?" I think about it all the time, he admitted. About how I let fear make a decision that cost me everything. Clara turned slightly in her seat. You're here now, and he's lucky. But I can't go back and unlive those years. I can't through. I'm not asking you to, Ethan said. I'm not here for you to forget. I just want to be worthy of being part of what comes next. Clara sighed and looked at their son again. He's my everything. You hurt us both, even if he doesn't know it yet. I know, Ethan said. I live with that every day. But I'll keep showing up, even when it's hard, even if I don't get all of what I want. Because he deserves a father, and you deserve peace. That night, after bringing Leo inside and putting him to bed, Clara sat on the couch and allowed herself to cry for the first time in months. Not because she was broken, but because a part of her, just a splinter, was starting to hope again. And that kind of hope is the most terrifying of all, a quiet kind of love. As the weeks went on, Ethan began helping in more practical ways. He volunteered to drive Leo to his speech therapy sessions once a week. He stayed through parent-child playgroups. He even started cooking Sunday breakfast when he was invited inside. It started with small things, Clara asking him to grab milk at the store while she was changing Leo, or him wordlessly passing her wipes. But over time, those small things became habits, and the space he occupied in their lives slowly became less temporary. Leo noticed too. He no longer called Ethan by his name. He called him Chai, a nickname born from childish mispronunciation and worn with affection. Ethan didn't correct it. He wore it like a badge. And then, one night, as Leo fell asleep on Ethan's chest during a movie, Clara looked over and realized her fear had been replaced with something else. She still couldn't name it, but she no longer braced for him to disappear. She no longer wondered if he was playing a part. He wasn't perfect, but he was real. And real was more than she had thought she'd ever get. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't love. But it was something close. It was the beginning of a life neither of them had planned. They were both now brave enough to reach for it. Autumn settled softly over the city of Portland, Oregon, blanketing the streets in gold and rust-colored leaves. The air turned crisp, and Leo started insisting on wearing his favorite little bare-eared beanie, even indoors. It had been almost 6 months since Ethan had returned to their lives, and though no one had labeled what they had, the routine they had created was undeniably a shared one. Ethan was there most days, picking Leo up from daycare when Clara had late meetings, reading bedtime stories, attending preschool open houses, and even helping to assemble a wobbly IKEA bookshelf that had been half-built in Clara's hallway for almost a year. He had become a fixture in their home, not as a guest, but as something more steady. With the comfort of that routine came complexity, however. Clara found herself questioning her own boundaries. Ethan was not the same man who had left her in a hospital bed. He was softer now, more thoughtful. He asked before doing anything, and listened when she spoke. He never interrupted. He never argued for the version of the past that made him feel better. He owned his mistakes, in a way that felt raw and unpolished, and that made it even harder for Clara to hold him at a distance. One Thursday evening, after a long day at work, Clara came home to find Ethan and Leo in the kitchen. They were making pancakes for dinner, batter everywhere, flour on the countertops, Leo's face smeared with maple syrup and pride. It was chaotic, but it was beautiful. Ethan looked up, a little sheepishly, and said, "We got hungry, and someone wanted to help." Clara didn't scold them. She just laughed, a soft sound that surprised all three of them. That night, after Leo was in bed, she poured 2 mugs of tea and sat opposite Ethan at the kitchen table. They talked about nothing for a while. About her annoying coworker. About a strange ad Ethan saw on the subway. About what Leo had learned in preschool that week. But as the conversation lulled, Ethan's gaze grew serious. "Do you ever think about what this is?" he asked quietly, not looking directly at her. She stirred her tea slowly. "All the time. I just don't know how to define it yet." "Me either," he admitted. "But I know it's not pretend. I know I care about him. And I care about you." That never really stopped Clara. She looked at him then, and her heart did what it used to do when they were younger. When love felt like an open road instead of a collapsed bridge. She wanted to believe him, but part of her was still protecting the version of herself that had been abandoned. "I don't trust easily anymore," she said after a pause. "And I can't promise you that I'll be able to give you what you're hoping for." "I'm not asking you to promise anything," he said. "Just keep letting me be here. Let me earn it if I can." And she nodded, because that felt safe, because it was honest. In the weeks that followed, their dynamic shifted in small but notable ways. Clara started inviting him to stay for dinner without him asking. Ethan brought Leo's favorite muffins on Monday mornings before work. One Friday, he fell asleep on the couch while reading to Leo, and Clara covered him with a blanket instead of waking him. The moments were simple, but they added up. They started sharing the weight of parenting in a way Clara hadn't realized she was missing. When Leo got sick with a bad flu, Ethan stayed up with her all night, holding a basin, wiping their son's forehead, running to the pharmacy in the rain without complaint. He didn't just show up. He stayed, through the messy, the exhausting, the real, and Clara, watching him curled on the edge of her sofa at dawn, realized he wasn't doing it for guilt anymore. He was doing it because he loved their son, because he loved her. Still, she didn't say those words out loud. Not yet, but the wall between them had begun to crumble, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder what it would be like if they weren't just co-parents, if they were something more. She wasn't ready to name it, but she wasn't turning her back on it anymore either. When winter came, snow blanketed the city of Portland in a soft silence. Their lives had settled into a quiet rhythm that almost felt like a family. Ethan had taken to his role with a naturalness that surprised even himself. Leo began to anticipate him, not with hesitation, but with delight. Small arms reaching for hugs, proud declarations like, "Chai's picking me up today," echoing in the preschool hallways. He still didn't call him Dad, and Ethan never asked him to. The name didn't matter. The connection did. For Clara, the slow transformation was harder to process. She was used to doing things alone. She had survived the sleepless nights, the scary illnesses, the empty holidays, all with no one to lean on. And now, here he was, no longer a shadow from her past, but a real man who showed up in ways that weren't just for show anymore. He was a part of the routine, and a part of her. One afternoon, just before Christmas, they attended Leo's preschool holiday concert. It was the kind of chaotic event only parents and toddlers could love. Paper snowflakes were taped to the walls, glitter was everywhere. Teachers were trying to keep 3-year-olds in a row while they sang off-key carols. Leo stood proudly in the front row, his reindeer antlers slightly askew, and Ethan sat next to Clara, filming the whole thing with a shaky hand and misty eyes. Clara looked at him once, catching the rawness in his expression. That, more than any apology he had ever uttered, told her how much he had changed. After the concert, they bundled Leo up and walked to a nearby restaurant for hot chocolate. Leo chattered about his songs, his classmates, how he was the loudest reindeer, and how Chai had to watch him sing again at home. Clara smiled through it all, sipping her cocoa, occasionally brushing snow from Leo's eyelashes. It was simple, it was ordinary, And that scared her more than anything, because simple was the one thing she'd never had with Ethan before. Later that night, with Leo asleep in the car seat, Ethan didn't start the engine right away. They sat in silence, the windows slightly fogged with their breath. "I never thought I'd get to have this," he said, not looking at her. "This?" Clara asked. Her voice quiet. He nodded. "Not just being a father, being with you too. You let me in, even when I didn't deserve it." "You didn't," she said with honesty. "But you stayed long enough to earn your way back." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I was going to wait until Christmas, but I think maybe it's time." Clara looked at it warily. "What is it?" "It's not what you think. Not a ring or some dramatic gesture. I know we're not there yet, but I wanted to give you this." She unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a simple photo frame. Inside was a candid snapshot of Leo on Ethan's shoulders in the park, laughing so hard his face was flushed. On the bottom, engraved in the silver, were the words, "The moment I knew I was never leaving again." Clara stared at the photo for a long time, her throat tight. "You've changed," she whispered. "I had to," he said, "but more than that, I wanted to." They didn't kiss that night. There were no grand declarations, just a long, quiet drive back to her apartment. When they arrived, Ethan carried Leo upstairs, put him to bed without waking him, and got ready to leave. But at the door, Clara stopped him. "Do you want to stay for dinner tomorrow?" she asked. "It's just spaghetti, but it's something." Ethan smiled. His heart swelled in a way he hadn't felt in years. "I'd love to," and so it continued. Slowly, unrushed, without pressure, without guarantees. Just two people finding their way back to something that had been broken, something that was still scarred, but healing in a way neither of them had dared to hope for. For the first time, Clara stopped bracing for the worst. She allowed herself to believe in what was growing between them. And Ethan, humbled by everything he had once taken for granted, finally understood the depth of what it meant to be part of a family. Not just to love, but to stay. The beginning of forever spring arrived with subtle changes. The snow melted into soft puddles along the sidewalks. Leo's winter boots were replaced with sneakers, and Clara found herself opening the windows again, just to let the fresh air in. It had been almost a full year since Ethan had reappeared in their lives, and the change in all three of them was undeniable. Leo thrived, secure, happy, and bright. He knew his two parents now, not just one, and he never questioned that both were his. He didn't understand the past, and Clara hoped he never would. Not the loneliness, not the betrayal, not the cold silence that once sat between them. All he knew now was warmth. For Clara, there were still moments of hesitation. Her wounds hadn't disappeared. They had simply scarred over in quiet, invisible ways. But Ethan had continued to earn back every ounce of trust. He never missed a school event. He never forgot pickup time. He never crossed the invisible boundaries she had drawn in the beginning. Over time, she stopped noticing those boundaries because he stopped needing reminders. He understood her rhythm, her silence, her looks, the weight behind a single glance. He knew when to lean in and when to give her space. And that, more than anything, had healed her. One afternoon, they sat on the front steps of Clara's apartment, watching Leo blow bubbles across the lawn. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over everything. The light made Ethan's hair look even blonder, and his eyes softer than she remembered them being years ago. Leo laughed and chased the bubbles with his whole body, arms outstretched as if he were trying to catch the entire sky. Clara smiled, her shoulders relaxed. There had been so much tension between them once. Now there was just this quiet contentment. Ethan leaned back on his hands and looked at her intently. You know, I used to think my whole life was about accomplishments. The next big deal, the next title, the next headline. But none of it ever felt like this. Clara turned to him, her expression open. Like what? Like home, he said simply. Not a place, but people. You and Leo are my home. She didn't speak right away. That word, home, meant something different to her. It wasn't soft carpets and warm meals. It was survival. It was long nights alone with a baby and no answers. But she understood what he meant, because lately she had started to feel the same way. The three of them, imperfect, bonded together, had built something strong. Not because it had been easy, but because it had been hard, and they had stayed anyway. I never thought I'd say this, she said, her voice low, but I'm glad you came back. Ethan looked down, his throat tight. I didn't know if I'd ever deserve to hear that. You don't, she said, but with a smile that softened the words. But you're here, and that's more than I ever thought I'd get. Leo came running over at that moment, collapsing into Clara's lap, a whirlwind of giggles and grass-stained knees. Ethan reached over and smoothed his hair back. Leo leaned into the touch without hesitation. It was natural now, unquestioned. Clara watched the moment, burning it into her memory. There had been so many nights she had rocked this child to sleep, wondering if he would ever know his father. And now here he was, tangled up between the two of them. Safe. Weeks later, on a warm April afternoon, Ethan asked if they could go somewhere special. Just the three of them. He didn't say why. He just told them to dress comfortably. They drove out of the city, past open fields and winding back roads, until they came to a quiet house with a wraparound porch. It wasn't ostentatious. It wasn't grand. But it was beautiful, with enough room for a little boy to run and enough quiet for Clara to breathe. This was my grandmother's house, Ethan said, as they got out of the car. She left it to me when she passed away, and I never did anything with it. I didn't know what it was for, until now. Leo ran across the tall grass like it was his own private kingdom. Clara walked the perimeter slowly, taking it all in. The old swing set, the ivy climbing the porch, the steady breeze. Ethan joined her after a moment. I'm not asking for anything. His voice was careful. But I wanted to show you this, because I want to build a life. Not just moments, not just weekends. I want the whole... Clara looked back at the house, then at him. There was no fear in her this time, no suspicion, just the quiet certainty that came from time, consistency, and a love that had been tested and proven to be real. I don't know what the future holds, she said, but I'm not afraid of it anymore. He held out his hand. She let herself take it. And in that small moment, under the open sky, with the sound of their son's laughter echoing from the trees, what had once been broken between them was whole again. Not perfect, not untouched, but whole. And that was enough to begin forever. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave your opinion in the comments. Your support helps us continue to tell stories that touch the heart.